So today we're going to be drawing a portrait, or at least half of a portrait, a kind of fragmented portrait. I'm kind of starting with the basic outline. The reference is a very direct kind of shot of the eyes and nose. So I'm kind of outlining where these areas are going to start and stop. You can already kind of see the bridge of the nose being developed, this cross section. There's actually a way of lining up the outside edges of each eye with the bottom of the nose in the form of like an inverted triangle. You've probably seen that type of thing before. I do it very loosely here just because I'm not staying completely, I'm not following like a really rigid structure or anything like that for this particular drawing. And I'm also going to be, I'm kind of approaching it with the intention of splitting up a section of the face, so I'm not really following that exact format, but you've probably seen it before. It's kind of a common way to make sure that the bottom of the nose doesn't end up too far down the face. Now again, I'm not drawing the entire face here, but it's a good way to kind of lighten things up properly. I mean, really, the center of the eye, I'm kind of following that basic cross setup, and again, it's a very direct reference, so there's not a lot of strange angles, or the ratio doesn't change between the bridge of the nose, space between eyes and nose. And a lot of these marks are almost sort of abstract. I'm very loose with the way that I begin these first lines. I only kind of start to darken and hone in on different areas when feels necessary, especially when there's a lot of shadow and other types of values that are darker. This is a particular way of portraying the face that I kind of fell upon a long time ago, and I've always sort of repeated this idea. I really like this broken apart, fractured look of the face. I think someday I'd love to really do a sculpture of it or something like that, where you just have these like parts of the cheek and forehead, the main eyes and nose being the focal point. I'm not going to be including necessarily a mouth here. And there's a lot of dark values in the reference, so I'll be bringing those out through a lot of cross-hatching and kind of dark areas that will involve a lot of line work. Heavy line work, but we won't be really using large pens or kind of wide pens or anything like that. I'm using mostly micron pens. For this preliminary sketch, I'm just using a basic drawing pencil. I don't think I could find my graphite pencils, so I'm just using this one for now. It's funny how the first bit of drawing is always it's a little bit random for sure. It definitely is a reflection of kind of how I'm thinking while I'm drawing. It's a little bit all over the place, but that's just kind of the nature of it. I do really like this particular composition. It seems to work really well. I've done it quite a few times now, and I think when you find an idea that you do like, it's really nice to just develop it in as many ways as you can, especially when you're drawing or when you're an artist. I mean, painting, any kind of art form, once you find something that you're comfortable with, or at least is a part of, the aesthetic that you're trying to put out into the world, I think it's a good thing to do that in as many different versions as you see fit. When I was young, I never really understood that, like why an artist would repeat an idea, especially quite a few times, what would end up being like a series or something, like an artist series. But as I got older, and especially now that I've been making art for so many years, I definitely understand it, because when you find an idea that you like, you can kind of think of a million different ways to like twist it and change it and do it in different forms and sometimes with different mediums, and I understand that now. It's almost like sometimes your vision is like a puzzle and it takes so many pieces to put together and to properly develop it. And a lot of those pieces can look very similar, and it doesn't take away from your vision at all. You're not necessarily ever repeating yourself, even unless you're intentionally doing so and copying or something. But I kind of understand that more now. And I think people appreciate that too, especially people that appreciate art and like looking at art. I've never heard, it was only like when I was a kid I wondered what that was about. I didn't quite understand it, but I mean, when you go to like a museum or something and you see an artist show and you see like a certain subject matter they've done in so many different ways. I mean, everyone is kind of specific in a sense, even if it is the same subject matter or the same figure or model or something like that. Or so I think it's good to do that. That's what these studies are about. These eyes and nose study. They remind me a little bit of like how they do feel like studies. I mean, they remind me of like the old ateliers, like where you'd see a piece of an ear, a piece of an eye to be studied and drawn and replicated for practicing students. And I like the idea of this being almost like statuesque in a sense. A lot of my drawings, I guess, I feel like that way though. And this line work that's going in now is with a Micron pen. I'm switching between a couple different sizes. And right now it's a 03, I believe. I still seem to like these pens a lot. I've been drawing with them for a really long time. But I'm kind of moving away from them into other types of pens too. Especially other types of pens that can be a little hardier. Microns don't necessarily last forever, it seems like to me. I'm using a lot of different directional line work, and I'm already kind of developing this eye before I've even started the other one. I'm definitely going out of order in this particular drawing, but sometimes that's just what I feel like doing. It works fine. I kind of understand the process already in my head, like how things are going to be built up. And now that I've had my sketch done, there's nothing really wrong with it. And I'm definitely utilizing, I think, well, another reason I like the eyes and nose kind of composition is because you can utilize all this space around the three main subjects here. And there's so much you can do with, where the mouth is supposed to be. You can kind of turn this into like loose abstraction. The cheeks are such a great large plane area that you can just create all these abstract shapes in, especially as the eyes like develop outwards into the cheek. That's always a really fun like place to bring in weird shapes and floral elements, and the forehead acts in the same way, really. Some of the shapes end up being kind of floral, geometric. Some of them almost become like I want movement within the shapes, so they almost look like flames, or they look like something that you could find and represent in reality, but very much abstract versions of those things. I'm not using reference for any of those types of things, only for the eyes and nose to make sure that I get values down. I don't have the reference pictured here, obviously, but for reference, I usually just kind of pull up pictures or things that, I usually find reference really fast. Just something that catches my eye to capture the sketch for the day. My drawing rarely ends up looking like the reference, so I don't really include it in these videos, but that's all right. There's nothing special about the reference. I usually just try to find something that I like, or that has a variety of values and tones that will allow for me to use a lot of line work to develop things in interesting ways. Something that has shading that's dark, but not overly darkened, so that most of the drawing is just going to be black. That's not necessarily something that I love doing. I love a lot of kind of middle tones, gray tones, but then some highlights too, so you can differentiate between things. And again, most of the time I just go on Pinterest for that type of thing. It's not, I don't have like a special set of references. For painting, it's different. I don't use Pinterest for painting reference or any of those types of things. I used to a long time ago, but I ran into too many problems. And once you start kind of painting and forming, getting realistic looks in your figures and portraits from Pinterest photos, it falls too much into the category of like I'm kind of just copying this reference photo that I don't own the rights to. So I kind of stopped doing that. But for drawings, I mean, my drawings are so abstract and they end up so different from the reference in general. They're not necessarily super recognizable. And, you know, if you draw, I could draw the eyes of some random actor or something, and they're not going to be exactly like those eyes. And my drawings aren't meant to be like specifically realistic. I want them to have a feeling of realism in a sense. You know, I don't want them to be completely like characterized or cartoonish or something. So I do want the values and buildup of tones and texture to make sense. You know, I want depth in the drawing, and for that, reference is best to use. I don't think I make things up when it comes to the portrait or figure very often at all. I'm usually a reference for that. Abstraction is a completely different thing. Like that gets done in a different way, and that's something that it's like including, you know, a random doodle into the figure. I don't use a lot of reference for abstraction. I'm inspired by different types of things and types of abstraction that I've seen, but I don't necessarily reference it. I try to let that flow more naturally because that's, I think, where my signature feel or look can come from. So I don't necessarily copy abstraction or line work from any other source. But that being said, there's definitely a lot of inspiration from other types of sources. I think that's a good thing to do too. I mean, I don't think there's any harm in that. You want to see and like replicate what has come before with your own twist and version of it. And I've talked about that before in a couple other videos, but you're always kind of developing that, and the more you understand your own process means the deeper you can go into your own vision, and the more you can see in other people's visions too. That's like the natural progression of skill development in general. So that works with ink and drawing and everything else as well. And I decided to have this video be in real time so that you can kind of see the breaks and the pauses in between different lines. I think it kind of helps with kind of viewing how, or at least the decision-making process that takes place in a drawing. A couple of the other videos, I would clip all these things away, but I thought this one would be kind of interesting to show somewhat everything that takes place. There's a lot of back and forth, of course, between looking at the reference and going back to the drawing, but only to make sure things are kind of lining up correctly. For the most part, I was pretty happy with the way everything developed. And the really fun part is like finishing shadows so that you achieve the correct depth, and then playing with all the abstraction around it and really bringing out those other areas, these kind of wider planes that don't necessarily have a lot of texture or line work in them, but they'll be defining areas for sure. And they give a sense of like a solid sense to, you know, around the eye, like something that's like tangible, something that like it gives it like body. So you don't, the line work is almost there just to define like shape and texture and value, but the actual outline of the shapes and the way that that shape interacts with the next shape next to it, even if it doesn't have line work in it, it gives the drawing value. I'm sorry, not value, but it gives it like a feeling of like something you could like grab onto. So it kind of like represents it. It brings it into like reality in a sense, if that makes sense. But, and then the finishing touches are always like the most satisfying because you've done all the heavy lifting, and now you're going to kind of finalize and complete the the final touches that bring all these shapes together. I have to be careful because they're supposed to be just kind of quick studies, but I tend to go back into them, and if I'm not careful, then I'll just continue on them for another 10, 20 minutes. And they're meant to be just kind of fun, quick drawings and sketches that I didn't necessarily want to just like have in my sketchbook. Sometimes having them in like a plain like black frame is just can look the best and simplistic, but I kind of want to float them sometimes too. And showing drawings in galleries is really specific, and they're a little different from some other work. The line work is like brings all these things together as far as figurative work and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, just doing finishing touches on these and trying to complete everything, kind of tie in some of these areas around above the eye. And there's so many shapes in this, what we're seeing as the left eye, but I guess the right eye, but this particular area and spot is these are definitely my favorite parts, because I'm getting shape to some of these weird like geometric forms and shapes that are surrounding the face. And I'm also noticing a couple areas where I could develop a little more shading, so I'm kind of going back into those places, kind of building out some of these forms. But I'm trying to pay attention to that balance too. I don't want to like overdo an area, so even though the end is the most satisfying in trying to complete the drawing, you also have to be careful. I have to kind of watch myself a little bit, because I can overwork an area and then there's no going back after that. It's not a painting. I can't paint over stuff. And once you've done that, it's in my view, it can kind of offset the balance of heavy to light, areas in the composition. Even with something as simple as this, I don't know, it'll be upsetting, because I spent 20 minutes drawing something that I really, really loved, and then all it takes is like a minute of not paying attention to the bounce and to heavy or light line work, and over too much texture, not enough texture, and it can just kind of ruin it. If there is some bounce that is needed in certain places around the drawing, then I'll add more. But otherwise, this one's, I think, looking good. I'm happy with how things worked out, and I think things got developed in the right way. It was almost, I thought halfway through it was going to be a little bit more of like a boring composition somewhat, but I think the dynamic kind of like angle of the cheek leading into where the nose is, and the way that the shapes developed around like the right eye, I really loved that. And there's some strong like geometric forms here that I liked a lot, so I'll probably do another 100 versions of it and not get tired of it. It's a composition I continue to love and really love developing and playing around with. I haven't done a painting in this style, which I've thought about now, and after kind of doing a few of these, but I might try that too. I'm still working on ways to combine like paint with this direct way of representing line, but I guess that's an ongoing thing. That's everything that I've tried to do. So I suppose I'm oversimplifying things now that I'm saying it out loud. But in the end, I'm just kind of finalizing these heavy lines, making sure I'm happy with the way everything's kind of built out. But for the most part, I think I am. I always love to highlight the little, like what would be the little kind of white touches in the photograph or the reference, because the background is completely white. You can't really do that otherwise in any other way without highlighting it. And a couple last forms just to kind of complete and finish up. And yeah, I think this one turned out well. But thank you all for watching and for watching my content, and I appreciate all your guys' comments and everybody that's here, so thank you.